video, I'm gonna make just like a short video about my experience with the History IA. And hopefully throughout this video, I'll be giving you guys some tips on how you can do your History IA. Now this video is just gonna be about my personal experience, like how I found writing the History IA. But I am working on a History IA tips and tricks guide kind of video, so stay tuned for that. If you have any questions about how to write the History IA that I could answer in that video, please leave them in the description. I spent a lot of time working on my other IAs, but this is the IA that I pretty much spent the least amount of time on. That's not to say that I didn't spend a large amount of time on it. I did. For the other IAs, I gave myself time and like the ability to for the other IAs, I gave myself time and freedom to like try a bunch of random things. For the other IAs, I gave myself time and like the freedom to just like waste time to like try different new things. But for the History IA, I really just like tried to make sure that I was wasting as little time as possible and that I was like being super efficient and not wasting my time on any specific area that I didn't need to. So I don't think I spent more than 2 weeks on it, but those 2 weeks weren't just like chill or whatever. They were like super hardcore, like Sinead, super focused, like trying not to waste time, trying to be productive as possible, narrowed in, focused on doing the History IA. The nature of your IAs is going to be, some are going to take a week, some are going to take a month, some are going to take 3 months, and that's just kind of the nature of the IB programs. Like I put a lot of effort and trial and error into it, but I was super like, I don't want to spend so much time on this. I only want to do what I have to do to get a 7. And turns out that is still a lot of work. So yeah, I miraculously ended up getting a 7, but my mark was still knocked down a bit by the examiner. So my teacher predicted me a 22 out of 24, but the examiner knocked me down to a 20 out of 24, which thankfully is still a 7. And just for the record, getting that 7 on my History IA was super important to securing my final grade. In my exams, like I kind of flopped them. I got like 2 5s and like a 6, but because my IA was a 7, that evened things out to make it so that my final grade was a 6 rather than 5. Now for me, getting this mark was amazing because I have no talent whatsoever when it comes to history, in my opinion. It was never really my strongest subject, and I'm not naturally a fantastic academic writer or whatever. Like I had to put in so much work to achieve that grade. So how I first started going about doing my History IA is that I read through all of the IB guidelines as to what the History IA is, and I read through all of the mark schemes so that I knew how I was going to be assessed by. However, by far the most important thing before I got started was that I was reading lots of other people's IAs. Now it's hard to find History IA examples, but one of my friends who got like a 23 out of 24, she's so smart, she sent me her IA and I like analyzed her IA to the T. I would highly recommend that you do this before you start your IA. Things that I was looking for whilst reading through her IA was, number 1, structure, how she organized her paragraphs and ideas. Not simply paragraph by paragraph, but also within the paragraph. Number 2, style, what did her essay sound like? What sort of words and phrases was she using to try and get across her point? And number 3, how she referenced historians and used evidence. So once you start reading through other people's IAs, I would just keep those 3 things in mind. I was actually really inspired by my friend's IA, and I subconsciously ended up doing a similar thing to her, just with a different historical context. So my friend, what she did was she researched the reasons for the USSR's invasion of Afghanistan in 1989, I think, I can't remember. And she basically looked at the different perspectives, from the orthodox view to the revisionist point of view, as to why the USSR invaded Afghanistan. So the first part of her essay was looking at one perspective, the second part was looking at the other perspective, and then she came to a conclusion based off looking at both of those 2 perspectives to kind of form her own opinion about what happened. I thought this was a mad structure and something that I could easily do. I thought this was a mad structure and something that I could easily do just within a different historical context. And I decided to do a similar thing. So we were studying Latin America at the time, and we were reading about Guatemala, and we were talking about how in 1955 the CIA actually orchestrated a military coup to take over the democratically elected leader there. And there's lots of historical controversy and debate as to why the CIA was even involved in Guatemala, and so I decided to do the similar thing where I wanted to look at the reasons for CIA involvement in Guatemala. If you are looking for a History IA and you don't know what to do, and if you studied the Cold War, this is a great thing to do. If you've studied the Cold War, this is a great IA to do. The structure is really obvious. You just do orthodox, revisionist, then post-revisionist perspective if there is one. Just pick one of the countries that either the USSR or the USA invaded, and then do an essay down the reasons why they invaded. Because there's so much controversy, and because it's relatively recent, there's quite a few sources on them. Another reason why I really like this IA topic was because it was something that we had to study anyways for paper 3. So if a question had came up about some sort of topic around Guatemala, I would have been easily able to answer it because I had done it for my IA. This is something I would really recommend for you to do if you're doing your history IA. Do a topic that you have to know already for the exams. Sadly, no questions came up where I could use Guatemala, but if they did come up, I probably would have got a 7, I don't know. So how did I begin writing this IA? Well, like you should too, this IA simply just began with a bunch of research. You can't begin your IA without doing a bucket load of research. If you are confused about what you should do for your IA, just pick a topic that you're super interested in, do a bunch of research in it, try to find some sort of controversy between historians, and then flip it into a question. So whilst doing research, I made sure that I was taking notes on everything that I was reading. This is really important because the purpose of taking notes isn't to be like pedantic or whatever. The purpose of taking notes is so that you only have to read the article once and never have to read it again, because you have your notes, which has all of the information from the document in a way that you can just easily use for your essay. When you come to writing your IA, you don't want to have to sift through articles to find sources that you can reference. You want to just have like a list or a table of all of the key points, quotes, and historical opinions already in that table, so you can just pick stuff from that table to use whilst you're writing your IA. So at the time, I made a table that looked like this, and it had 3 columns in it, one with the historian's name and the source title, another with any quotes that I liked or like chunks of information that I wanted to store, and the third was just like a summary about what the article was about, so I could know immediately like what side or what perspective the article was coming from. Now this worked fine, but had I done it again, I would have definitely used Rome Research to do my research on, but check it out. It's like a note-taking system for doing research. But the most important thing is that you do take notes, because you don't want to be that kind of person who spends hours and hours and hours searching for that one quote that you lost because you know it's really important, but you can't remember where it was. And after you've done all your research, then you should be able to come to a conclusion about. And after I did all my research, I had like a clear idea about what the structure of my IA was going to be like, and I already had like a well-defined research question. And so after I collected all of my sources and I had a well-defined research question and I had a relatively good idea about how I wanted to structure the IA, then I began writing. Initially, I was structuring my essay relatively simply. I was just going to do the orthodox perspective, the revisionist perspective, and then my conclusion. During the writing process, I have 2 stages for whilst I'm writing. Number 1 being drafting and number 2 being editing. So pretty much how my brain works is that I feel like once I have the right information, that being my research bank of quotes and stuff, I can easily have like my thoughts and opinions just flow out of my head in perpetual motion, which means that I can write a lot fairly quickly. So usually in my drafts, I'm just going with the motion, writing down whatever comes to mind, all of my ideas and all of my opinions. Pretty much every like thought, feeling, and like nudge I have about the topic I'm writing about, I'm just like writing that in like this huge messy draft. That being said, 90% of what I'm writing is crap, but the idea is to get all of the ideas out of my head and onto the paper. It's poorly written, it doesn't have a nice style, it's got really like simple grammatical language, but it doesn't matter. The point is I'm trying to get it out of my head onto the paper. So once I've exhausted my brain of writing and all of my ideas are onto the paper, then I begin the editing stage. So once I've gotten all of my ideas onto the paper and my argument has been made, the issue then becomes the fact that I am the only one that can properly read and understand what I've written. So from this point, I move from like vomit writing to editing writing, in which I'm in this phase I'm editing, and basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to turn my word vomit into somewhat sophisticated sounding prose. I'm adding in quotes, I'm adding in references, I'm adding in extra historical opinions here. I'm trying to make what my word vomit was sound somewhat legit. And I do multiple rounds of refining, rewording, rewriting all of my paragraphs until they sound like legit. I much more enjoy this process. I'm not a perfectionist. I don't care if every single word sounds correct the first round. I more enjoy the idea of having to write the first initial draft, which just has all of my ideas that are like crappily expressed and not very nicely written. I more like the writing process of having a huge draft of just mumble jumble but the mumbo jumbo nevertheless has some good ideas in it, and then trying to turn that mumbo jumbo into something that sounds pretty legit. All writing is rewriting, guys. Like, maybe you'll save time if you try to be sophisticated at the start and you like hum and haw for every single sentence, but in my opinion, I find it so much less stressful to turn like a simply written essay with strong ideas into a sophisticated sounding essay through many edits and revisions. I feel like that's a lot easier than having to try and write a masterpiece all in one go. All writing is rewriting, my friend. So after I finished my first draft, I was pretty happy with it. I handed it to my teacher. She sent it back with lots of red ink all over the place, lots of comments, lots of things to fix, and I wasn't upset by this. I was super grateful for her comments. I have the humility to accept the fact that I am not a natural born genius at writing history essays, and so I just immediately got to work fixing my essay, trying to make it sound better, trying to incorporate anything that she said in her comments into my essay. However, amidst writing this, I had a little bit of a crisis. Whilst I was doing a little bit of extra research, I uncovered this essay. Whilst I was doing a little bit of research on my essay, I uncovered the post-revisionist perspective for the topic that I was doing. And this perspective basically debunked everything that I was trying to prove. Like, I had concluded saying that the revisionist perspective is the right one, but the post-revisionist perspective put everything in a whole new perspective and showed how the situation was so much more complicated and nuanced than I thought. Like, the argument said that basically the conclusion that I came to was bullshit. So at this point, I was at a crossroads. I was already over the word limit, and so I had to decide, do I just like continue on and just pretend the post-revisionist perspective doesn't exist, or do I try and incorporate this into my essay somehow? And I basically came to the conclusion that I'm pretty shit at writing history exams, and I really need to secure like a 7 in this assignment. So I decided that fuck it, I'm just gonna try and incorporate this perspective into my essay because I know it's gonna make it like 10 times better. So eventually I had the essay structure of orthodox perspective, revisionist perspective, post-revisionist perspective, where I eventually conclude with the post-revisionist perspective. That little extra bit of effort was worth it because I got a 7, and having that structure of like 3 different historical perspectives really helped me like get my mark up. And so I handed it in to my teacher for my second round of revisions, and again I received a ton of feedback and corrections, which I was grateful for, and so I just got to work on touching up the essay, trying to make it as like sophisticated, academic, and beautiful as possible. I spent a few drafts just like rewording things, trying out different like sentence structures, trying to like put things in different places, and I just kept like refining the essay, tweaking things until it was like the essay that like I imagined. And eventually I got an essay which I was really proud of. And so, as you know, the History IA also asks you to do an OPVCL and a reflection. I left these to the end because I didn't want to write them. Like, they just don't sound interesting to me, and I just had no interest in writing them. But you have to do them to get those marks, so of course I did it. Like, I did them on books that I didn't even read. I just read like other people's opinions of those books. I felt like such a ninja trying to write this OPVCL, trying to sound like I had read the book when I actually hadn't. And how I figured out how to write these OPVCLs, I just basically read a bunch of samples online, and I read through a bunch of advice online on how to write an OPVCL. It's actually quite a structured thing, so it's not that hard to do. There's lots of prompts online that can help you write this. And I actually ended up writing like 4 mini drafts of OPVCLs because I wasn't sure which source was gonna lead to like the best OPVCL, because it's not really like the OPVCLs are hard to write by any means. They're not that hard to write. Like, the hard part is picking like which source you want to do for your OPVCL. And so I wrote like 4 mini drafts of OPVCLs, and then with the help of my teacher I just picked which 2 were the best ones. So if you can't decide which source to use, you should just like try and do it for like 4 to 5 different sources, and then see which one you think feels like the easiest and like most interesting to write about. Then for the reflection, I found the reflection really weird, but I think I did well because I felt like my reflection was really genuine, and I think that's what you want to go for the reflection. The examiner is gonna know if you're like trying to just make up stuff and bullshit stuff. And so I wrote about truth in history, and I wrote about how, it is not the role of a historian to represent absolute truth in history, but instead to investigate a plethora of claims and reach a well-sustained argument, which is supported by historical sources, yet subject to change upon the discovery of new evidence and perspectives. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that you can't prove shit in history, and you basically just have to do the best with the sources that you have. And when a new source comes and disproves your theory, you can't be a bitch about it. You just gotta accept that new fact as the truth. Sound familiar? This is exactly what happened to me. And how I did this was I talked about my own personal experience with this conundrum in history, where whilst writing my AA, I thought I had found the truth, but turns out there was a whole new perspective that debunked everything that I believed in. Yeah, and that's how I wrote my reflection. And yeah, that's the end of this video. Thanks to anyone who made it this far. My final thoughts and opinions is that if you are an IB history student, I'm gonna push you into saying that you should really work hard on your IA, because those IB history exam markers can be so off-putting sometimes. You can't rely on them at all. The only thing that you can rely on is that you have a good IA. That's not to scare you, that's just to throw some hard truth at you. You can think you did really well on the exams and then get a 4. That's happened to so many of my friends who are like really smart at history, but then in the exam they get a 4. But they're saved because they had a solid, strong IA. I hope this has helped any of you guys who are trying to write your history IA. If you have any questions about IB history, please feel to DM me on Instagram or leave a comment. I really like talking to you guys, it's really fun. If you're doing an IA on either like the Cold War, the apartheid, the civil rights movement, Latin America, I may be able to help you. I studied those subjects in IB. Also like Hitler, Mao Zedong's China, Stalin. But anything else, like, don't ask me. So yeah, just DM me on Instagram and we can chat about that. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye!